Hey everybody, welcome to the Wednesday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah,
And I'm Jason Dehart.
and we are positively excited to bring you another great interview, this time with Mr. James Aquilone. James is a writer, editor, publisher. He's the man behind Monstrous Books, and he is also the man behind a new anthology that is kickstarting right now called Weird Tales. It is based on the magazine, which you probably have heard of, and brings together a number of artists and writers kind of tackling these classic stories of horror and macabre and mystery. And I think it's really worth a look for you on Kickstarter. And he has obviously a lot of projects in his past as well.
Yeah, some of those projects include, of course, Monstrous Books, as you mentioned, Mike, but he's known for the Omega 11 series with Monstrous Books. He's worked on numerous anthologies, some World of Cthulhu work, and as well as Kolchak. He had the license for Kolchak and has done a good bit of work in that world with folks like David Des Malkion. So he's quite an accomplished editor, writer, publisher. And we hope you enjoy the interview.
We are very excited to welcome Mr. James Aquilone to the program. James, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Doing superb. Thank you very
Doing
much.
well, doing well.
So, as always, our first question is, how did you first discover comics?
How? It was so long ago. I was probably like 5 or so, maybe even 4 years old. Comics were my first experience reading. Uh I loved books even before I could read. I used to have books all the time and I used to just love just opening them up and stacking them up. Uh but yeah, my first, experience with books were comics. And so we're going back to the late 70s. So that was, a really good time for geeks. Star Wars had just come out, the first Star Wars, the original Superman the movie was out when I was uh, like 5. So I was really excited when Superman the movie came out. I was like freaking out as a kid because I remember seeing the commercials, the trailers, and I was just so hyped for that. It was probably in between when I was watching, the old Batman TV show, which I was also like very so everything for me at that time was like superheroes, so Superman, Batman. So obviously comics were it was just natural to get into.
Do you have any memory of what some of those first issues were, or even if they were DC, Marvel, something else?
I think the first comic that I ever picked up was those, remember those giant size comics um of, I think it was Dick Tracy. I think it was like those the old like compilation of Dick Tracy, those giant size books, which I still love. And I actually just picked it up at a convention like a few months ago because I found it, and my copies is long gone. So I think that was the first one. I kind of think that I got it in the Poconos, in some little store that I gone back to many times. But I'm pretty sure that that's when I got my first comic, was one of those giant size comics of Dick Tracy, probably like 19 like 77 or something like that, 77 or 78, yeah.
Classic.
Such great years for fandom. And you've been a writer, an editor, a publisher. How did horror and weird fiction enter the story?
Oh boy, I wasn't always a horror fan. Like I said, I started out as a superhero, sci-fi, Star Wars, Superman fan. And that was also, in the early 80s, late 70s also was, pretty big time for horror. You had Halloween came out in like 1978, and then the Friday the 13th series. And that stuff as a kid scared the hell out of me. So I mean, that was more traumatizing. It was the opposite of the superhero stuff, which was just, kind of, emboldening and made you feel like a hero. But I remember seeing Friday the 13th with my friend, uh probably, like 8 or 9 years old, and I had to walk home, and I was terrified, and I ran home down the middle of the street because I thought like Jason would come out of the driveways and get me. So as a in the beginning, it was more traumatic horror. Zombies really scared the hell out of me. They scared so bad. I'd never watched another zombie movie. It's probably I probably did see one like back in the early 80s. I didn't see another zombie movie until like 28 days later. And the Dawn of the Dead remake is the early 2000s. And then I kind of when I saw that, I was like, oh wow. Because I was actually, in 2005, I was in my, now it's a little scary to say, I was like in my 30s, and I was a little hesitant to go see the Dawn of the Dead movie because I was like, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen a zombie movie in a long time, and that stuff scares the hell out of me. But I saw the Dawn of the Dead movie and 28 Days Later, and I loved it, and I was like, this is really awesome. And so that kind of rekindled, or even like kind of really more sparked my love of horror. Uh, and I think it kind of I kind of came full circle then, then it wasn't as traumatic, and then I that's when I kind of started more on the road of writing horror because by then I had already was starting to write, and the first stuff was writing was more sci-fi and fantasy, and then I started moving more towards horror, but I still write science fiction and fantasy and everything. And I really want when I first started writing, I really want to be a crime fiction writer. So I've been all over the place.
Nice,
Genre is
nice.
just a label.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and I love comedy too. So it's whatever, whatever mood I'm in, then that's what I do. But yeah, I mean, I love it all.
If I had seen Friday the 13th at 8 or 9, I think I might have been scared off from the whole horror movie thing for probably the rest of my life.
Yeah, I mean, now it doesn't seem like, Friday 13th that scary, but yeah, and I saw The Shining too at that time when it first came out. I saw it on like HBO or WHT, if you remember that, like early cable.
hmm
And I saw The Shining at probably yeah, it's all happened around like 8 years old, and that really traumatized me. So I think around that time it was a lot of horror stuff that I'd seen at a young age. Um, I don't know how old you guys are, but in the early 80s, there's also like a TV movie called The Day After, which is about like a possible nuclear war and
I've heard of it.
what would happen after there was a nuclear war. And I saw that as a kid, and that did really mess me up because after that, I was just terrified that, the world was going to end, and I was always just like if I would watch a TV show or see like a commercial, I would think this might be the last time I ever see that commercial or I ever see that TV show or I ever see that movie. And so it was just like that was something that was always on my mind too. So yeah, a lot of it was all like the early 80s. So it was it was a good time for horror, but I guess being a little kid, it wasn't a good time to kind of get into it. So there was a lot of stuff there was just like, ooh, and there's like, whoa, people like this, people like horror. But I come to embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to have worked for you. You've done done quite well by that,
Yeah, yeah.
the horror genre. So, people may know or may not know that you are the founder and owner of Monstrous Books, and I was curious, how that whole company came about. Like, what was the original vision for it?
Well, it started with Kickstarter. I did my first Kickstarter, which was for Classic Monsters Unleashed, was an anthology. But I didn't have the publishing company. I was just doing that as an editor, and I partnered up with Crystal Lake Publishing, also another Friday the 13th reference. And it did really well. And then after that, I did Kolchak 50th anniversary graphic novel, and I worked with Moonstone Publishing at that time. And basically, it became like, well, I'm doing the Kickstarters, I'm raising all the money, I'm doing basically all the work. I didn't really need the publishers, so why don't I just become a publisher myself? I mean, that was always kind of the goal, but it was more like, oh, I thought I needed the publishers or something at the time, and it was like, which seemed kind of silly because I'm doing the Kickstarter, so it was like you're raising the money, why give it, away to other publishers? So it was just it just made sense then just to start my own publishing company at that point. So then that's how it wasn't monstrous though. Then I was just doing Dead Jack LLC. And then it was just like, I need a better name for this. So then I come up with Monstrous. Basically as a nod to Classic Monsters Unleashed, that series that I started. So yeah, I was like 2022 we started Monstrous, and then we just, all the Kickstarters then started, to be under Monstrous Books.
Nice, nice. Speaking of Dead Jack, Zombie Detective, you're blending genres there. We've talked a little bit about that with horror and noir and humor. Curious about how that project came together and how did that character and world come together?
So that's way back, Dead Jack. Dead Jack was one of like the first short stories I've ever finished writing, like 2012 or 2014. I always had a hard time finishing short stories. And it took me a really long time to kind of figure out how to write a short story. Uh, and I wanted to write a webcomic, and I wanted it to do a detective thing because I said I really my first thing I wanted to write was crime fiction. Just let me write a detective story, and I love detective stories, but I want to do a weird detective story, like something that's really that wasn't hasn't been done before, something that's really strange. So then that was really kind of my first time, like really blending these different genres, and like I said, zombies kind of was traumatic to me, but also kind of then I started to like zombies after the Dawn of the Dead, and the funny thing there was that kind of revival of zombies in the early 2000s. So I said, no, no one's ever. I thought that no one had done anything like that. I thought like no one had done a zombie detective. I was thinking like a robot detective that goes. Uh, so then I wrote that story, and I kind of just filed it away. And then I took my first writing class because I graduated college with a journalism degree, but I never took a creative writing class because it was something that's like way too precious for me, and I knew I couldn't handle like going to a class and submitting a short story and then having it critiqued and ripped apart. So even though all through college I wanted to be a fiction writer, I just stayed away from it because it was just I couldn't handle the criticism. So years later, when I was just like, I want to take this seriously in my writing career, so I took an online creative writing class or a fiction writing class, and the first short story I wrote was like this very serious and dark magical realism type thing, and it just was terrible, and it was just a big mess, and it didn't go over very well. And then I had to submit a second story, and I had started writing a story and I couldn't finish it, and the deadline was coming up. So I said, "Oh, I have this zombie detective story, and it was a little too long, and so I cut it up, and then I just submitted it. And then after I submitted it, like the class read it, and they were like, "This is amazing. This is great. This is like this should be a series. I would buy this." So like the response was amazing, and I just thought it was like a throwaway thing. Uh, so then after that, I was like, all right, maybe I should do something with this. And then, strangely enough, that you bring up Dead Jack because there's the connection with Weird Tales because then I submitted it to Weird Tales because they were doing a zombie again, zombies and the Weird Tales, and it all comes together. They were doing a zombie issue, so I submitted it, and that ended up being my first acceptance. As a fiction writer was Dead Jack. So then we're kind of off to the races with that, and then I wrote more short stories on with Dead Jack, and I wrote the first novel, which is also then my first Dead Jack novel was my first Kickstarter way back in 2015 or something like that. So it started with Dead Jack with Kickstarters, and it was my first novel, and it was my first acceptance. So, and that started me with Weird Tales, and then I ended up talking with the guys from Weird Tales, and then they brought me on as a managing editor. So, so yeah, it's all connected.
So
all comes together.
yeah.
Yeah, so strange.
We're definitely going to get to the new Weird Tales anthology that you're putting together for Kickstarter. Going to be launching soon. But you mentioned already a number of your other projects, which are also anthologies, like classic Monsters Unleashed and Shakespeare Unleashed and the Night Stalker project as well. What do you find appealing about anthologies as a format that you keep coming back to?
Well, I love short stories. I'd never thought I'd be a short story writer or editor, but I actually read it was in Stephen King's book on writing. He said this is how you become a writer. He goes, you start writing short stories first, and then you try to get those published. And while you're trying to get those published, or you are getting those published, start working on your novel. Uh, this is kind of antiquated because I don't know if this actually works, now. But then if you have some short stories, you have some publications. So then when you go to try to get your novel published, you can go to an agent and say, "Hey, look, even though this is my first novel, I have all these short stories that I published." So they look at you as, "Oh, okay, you're serious about this and you've gotten published," which isn't a bad idea because starting off with short stories, at least it shows, okay, I can get published, I can finish a story. So I follow that advice. So I started writing short stories, but then I kind of got stuck just writing short stories. I really liked writing short stories, and I started getting them published. So I never worked on the novel for like 5 years. I just wrote short stories, and I felt like I was getting good at it, and I was getting published regularly. So so that's why I like anthologies and I like short stories, and it is a great way to work with a lot of people on one project and very fast. So you do an anthology, um, you're gonna probably be working with at least 12 writers. Classic Monsters, I think, had over 20 short stories, and Shakespeare might have had like 30 contributors. So anthologies are a really great way to kind of just get in there as an editor and a publisher, work with a bunch of people at once, and put something out. And it's really good for Kickstarters because you work with so many people. So now you have like a whole like a village of people of you have writers and you have artists all involved in this one project. So it makes it easier for something like crowdfunding, to crowd uh to come in to support it, but also you have a crowd working on it. So it works a lot better than if you're just writing or you're trying to kickstart like a novel when it's just you and then you're the only person pushing the campaign. But when you do anthologies, you get to work with a lot of people. So through anthologies, since I've been doing the Kickstarters, about 5 years now, I've worked with like over 100 people, so I get to work with like people like Steve Niles and Rodney Barnes. And you can do it in a much simpler way because it's a short story. So they don't have to write like maybe if it's a comic, they only have to write like a 10 or 14 page story. So it's much easier for them. So it's much easier then to work with them than say if I was publishing, let's say, novels to get somebody like Steve Niles or Randy Barnes say to write an entire novel or something for so it's much easier then to work with bigger names, or someone like Joe Lansdale, so with an anthology, you can reach out to a lot of these people and they will say yes, which is also the thing that I've learned that you can just email, like a New York Times bestseller and you say, you want to write a story for this anthology? And they'll say yes. So
Excellent.
Yeah, not bad. Yeah. You've worked also on Kolchak the Night Stalker, the 50th anniversary. What was it like tapping into that particular avenue of fandom and a cult favorite property like that?
that was pretty amazing too. Like I said, when I learned with doing the Kickstarters, when I did Classic Monsters Unleashed, that was the first time I was doing like a big Kickstarter. It was the first time I was doing an anthology as an editor. And I knew it wouldn't work if I couldn't get like big names to be part of it. Uh, but I didn't really know anybody. So I did know Jonathan Mayberry because I'd worked with him through Weird Tales. So he was the first guy I asked that says, I have this anthology and it's short stories based on the classic monsters, Frankenstein, Dracula, blah blah blah. And he said, "Oh, that sounds awesome. I'm in." So once like Jonathan was in, then I like went to the next guy and I said, "Hey, Jonathan Mayberry's doing it," and then and then I got Joe Lansdale, and then so it worked like that, and it's like, oh my God, I didn't think I'd be able to get all of these people. Um, Ramsey Campbell said yes, so I had all these big names. So then I kept it going. So after Classic Monsters, I said, I really want to do comics and graphic novels. I would love to do like with Classic Monsters, we did public domain stuff. Um, it'd be really awesome if we can do something licensed. So then I knew that Moonstone had was doing Kolchak stuff. I said, let's try to do Kolchak as a big Kickstarter. And luckily enough, there was this big anniversary, which just happened to be coming up a few months later, the 50th anniversary. So I reached out to them and then they said yes. So I was on a roll at that time, just emailing everybody and saying, you want to do this project or that project? And everyone was saying yes. It was also during COVID. So I think maybe that actually helped because everyone was at home and had nothing to do. So that's how, I got into Kolchak. It was, just I grew up watching that show, and it was an amazing show. So that was just really cool to be part of that, and that Kolchak just kind of really aligns with the type of stuff I do. Like it was kind of like a little bit more on the same line as like Dead Jack, who kind of had the humor and the horror and stuff. So I was very and like I said, I graduated college with a journalism degree, and I worked in journalism. I still do. um, for all these years. So Kolchak was very near and dear to my heart. So that was really awesome just to be able to, be part of that. And then to get the license too, and now to continue on Kolchak. It's been really, really amazing.
You've made mention of both writing and editing, and I know you continue to do both for these anthology series and beyond. Um, i- do you like to have that sort of balance of, writing your own material and collecting and sorting through, a number of others' works, or do you like one better than the other?
I it's been hard to write at that, it's been getting harder because there's so much more work to be done. Uh, I didn't think that, well, especially since they've been pretty successful with the Kickstarters, and then we've been adding projects, and now it's like there's so much like administrative stuff to do, and I can spend my whole day just emailing people and answering emails. So writing has been hard lately, but I do like that mix because I have a really short attention span too, so I can just move on to one thing after another and after another, and it's I wouldn't say it's easier, but it's just it is so hard just to, stare at the blank page and try to write something. And it is a lot easier to just to, have a story and then edit it because you know what to do, So it's that creative thing. It's just there's always those blocks where he's like, where it's like, oh, you put it off or just even just to write a page, it just seems so monumentally more difficult. So even though there's a lot of work in publishing and editing, you never have you have writer's block, but you never have publisher's block, right? And you never have editor's block. I can't edit, So it's more work too, but you can get stuff done. So writing is just can be such a weird psychological thing, and because like I said, I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, but I went like 20 years without really pursuing it and it was more like I said, a psychological thing where I was like had that imposter syndrome. It was like I'm never gonna get published. No one's ever gonna like anything I write. And then I would write and I go, this isn't good. This isn't as good as Stephen King. This isn't as good as Joe Lansdale. And I would just stop. And it took me years into really to just kind of buckle down and just start writing and getting published. So the writing is there's such a like a there's such a weird thing sometimes where like publishing and editing it's just a little more straightforward and easy to deal with.
Yeah, writing can be kind of a lonely pursuit, right? And
Yeah,
so I imagine it's good to have kind of both
yeah,
because when you feel like maybe you're stuck writing, you can kind of go get some inspiration from what you're editing and
yeah,
then if you need to take a break from all of that, operational stuff and get into the pure creativity, you can go back to writing. So,
Absolutely, because well, if I wasn't doing the publishing and editing, there'd be long gaps where I'm not doing anything, right? So at least I can get stuff out and you know get books out. You know what? It is so much easier to hire somebody and have them write it than to have yourself write it because look, I'm actually kind of prolific as a publisher and editor, but I'm not very prolific as a writer. I have, the last couple of years I haven't written too much, but at least I'm getting books out because and the people I work with, they have great work ethics. Jonathan Mayberry tells me he writes like 8,000 words a day, and he just goes, "Oh, I'm gonna write my novel today," and he knocks the thing out in like a week. Where I'm like, working on it for like years. So guys like him, Steve Niles, and like Rodney Barnes, they have this great work ethic where they just sit down every day and they write and write and write. And they get really angry too. Like if you disrupt that, it's like, oh, if I had to go do something and stop me from writing, that really upsets them. But they get a lot done. And I've never been able to really do that as a writer really be on that schedule, which I really wish I was able to write more. But also what you said, writing is a lonely thing, and then the anthologies, I get to work with all these people. So that's the big difference is that as a publisher and writer and an anthologist, I get to work with a ton of people, and if I'm just I'm just a lonely novelist, I just doing this all by myself, and then sometimes you don't even you publish something and you don't even hear about it, even on Amazon, you don't even sometimes now you don't even get reviews. You just get, the person just clicks, with, a number or something now. So you don't even get feedback on a lot of the stuff. So that can be difficult. So that is another, yeah, a plus in working on this stuff is that you get to work with a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. Circling to Weird Tales, this is a legend in genre fiction, quite a title, quite a name. Curious about what it's been like for you personally to be part of this legacy.
Yeah, I mean, Weird Tales started in 1923, and then
Hmm.
when you look at the list of people that they published, and even whose careers they basically started and nourished, from Lovecraft to Robert E. Howard, Ray Bradbury, it's kind of insane. Uh, so yeah, it's like I don't know how I'm working with Weird Tales too. So just to be connected to it in any way has been amazing, and and I've worked with Weird Tales now for a while. It was like 14, 15 years since they kind of well, Weird Tales has like restarted and stopped, and so they've come back from the dead so many times. Um, and I've been part, I think, two reincarnations of Weird Tales already. So that's just been incredible, and I've seen it kind of grow and get now it's probably doing better now. It's done in a long time because it was revived after the original run. It went from like 1923 to like maybe I think 1954 or 1955. And then it was kind of dead. I think they revived it like once in the 70s, and then it came back in the late 80s, and it's continued to publish on a pretty regular basis from the late 80s. I think sometimes there were some years maybe they missed, but pretty much from the late 80s it's been being published. Um, and then Jonathan Mayberry took it over as editor in like 2016, and so that's really now where it's kind of really kind of hit its stride, and they have a deal with Blackstone where they have their own imprint, so they've been putting out Weird Tales novels and stuff. So Weird Tales has kind of seen a little bit of renaissance in the last few years, and it didn't make sense to me that there was never a Weird Tales graphic novel. There was never an official Weird Tales graphic novel or comic because those stories are so iconic. They have been adapted before, and Marvel has done those stories in like various other publications. So, but there was never a dedicated Weird Tales book. So I've been pushing for that for years, and then they finally caved in and said, "All right, let's do it." So they let me do it, and now you know now we're doing it, and it's the book is already I would say it's about 75% done, and it looks incredible.
Nice, nice. Very, very appropriate for Weird Tales that it continues to be revived and it
Yes.
is brought back from time to time.
Yeah, it's like, it's like those it's like those like killers who come back every like 25 years, and wreak havoc. That's like weird too. Every couple of years it's like, oh, I don't and then people always say, "Oh, I didn't even realize that this was still around." And then it goes away and then it comes back and then everyone kind of remembers it again. So
So once you finally got the green light to turn this into a, graphic novel anthology, what did you want to kind of bring to it? What was your vision, and how did you kind of choose stories and things like that?
well, I knew I wanted to adapt some stories. Yeah, and that was difficult picking what stories to do. Um, some of them, like I said, have been done, you know, before. So we were looking for like a mix of some iconic stories and some of the stories that were maybe a little bit obscure, like the Damp Man, which which is like one of my favorites of the publisher, John Holliker, who kind of insisted we do the Damp Man. Damp Man's a very weird story, and it was like a trilogy back in the 50s in Weird Tales of this guy who's the Damp Man. He was like this big, giant, heavy guy who was damp. He's kind of like made up of water, and it turns out that he's like some kind of like alien type guy, and he's kind of sweaty, and he's always like water dripping off him, and just kind of this creepy guy who just like stalks women and stuff. So it's just kind of weird, and it's truly a weird story, and that's more along the lines of like yes, the very kind of more iconic weird fiction. So we did that with Nancy Collins. She wrote the script, and Marco Finnegan did the artwork for that. And then we knew we wanted, Lovecraft in there, and Rodney Barnes is doing a Lovecraftian story, I think a more original piece. Um, I had republished Michael Avallone's The Man Who Walked on Air for my Monstrous magazine. And this was Michael Avallone's one of his first short stories that was ever published. It was in Weird Tales in the early 50s. And I've worked with his son, David Avallone. So I said, this will be perfect. And he said to me, like, I would love to adapt that one day. And that was years ago before we were thinking of Weird Tales. So when I was doing Weird Tales anthology, I said, well, that makes sense. Let's have David Avallone adapt his father's story that was in Weird Tales. Like, that's perfect. So he adapted The Man Who Walked on Air. And we have Robert Hack, who did the artwork. Um, and then Jonathan Mayberry actually has a connection to Ray Bradbury. He was like mentored by Ray Bradbury when he was younger. I don't know how he knew him or even I mean you should have him on the show and ask him how that came about. But he knew Ray Bradbury when he was young. So I said we have to get him to adapt a Bradbury story. So he's adapting, or he already adapted. He already sent in the script of The Skite, and J.K. Woodward is adapting that one. So, and then we have Steve Niles is adapting Robbie Howard's The Skulls and the Stars. Uh, so we try to hit some of the big names from Weird Tales, and then we have the C.L. Moore's Shambleau, the Northwest Smith story. So which is like, and that's one of like the first like space opera stories. I mean, that's the thing. Weird Tales, a lot of people think it's just weird fiction and horror, but it wasn't. Weird Tales started almost every genre, subgenre. They, where Conan, they started the sword and sorcery genre there, and C.L. Moore's space opera stories, Northwest Smith they saw that. So and there was a H.P. Lovecraft and the weird fiction and the mythos stuff. That was just one of the things they did, in Weird Tales. But they did science fiction, they did fantasy. So basically, I would say pretty much every genre you can think of, it probably started in Weird Tales. So we tried, that was one of the things we wanted to kind of hit, um, you know, at least one story from every one of those other subgenres. And then we have a couple of original tales too that are connected to Weird Tales in some way or in the Weird Tales vein.
Nice, nice. Lots of great names there, lots of great authors and creators that I enjoy. Curious about anything that you want to add to that about the tones, the themes, the overall weirdness that people can expect. And again, you're naming people like David Avalone and Nancy Collins, and so Steve Niles, Rodney Barnes, so fantastic talent. But anything that you'd like to add there?
Well, yeah, I mean the tone is bizarre and unusual stuff. So it is weird stuff. There's some very pulpy. I mean, I love pulp, so I have my note is to everyone doing these stories or doing the art. It's always, pulp it up, give me more pulp. Uh, so we really want to hit that kind of the old-fashioned pulp style. So my focus always is on entertaining and being exciting and fun. So I think you're going to see a lot of that, and great artwork, and the artwork for this has been incredible. I just put up the first page for the skulls and the stars from this Russian artist that we're working with for the first time. Now he goes by Andre Lunatic. That's not his real name.
Oh,
But he said, no, that's what I want to be credited as. So it's Lunatik. But his stuff is amazing. So you have to really check out his work. And it's like, whoa, we're definitely going to work with you again because he really captures that. There are some people who do horror and some people who can't. Some artists, they do science fiction really well, or some of them do, fantasy really well, and some do horror. And he does horror really well. So I I'm really looking forward to showing his stuff. I mean, everyone did a great job, I'm saying. But this is the first time we're working with him. And he kind of really blew me away with his artwork. And I'm looking forward to working with him on other stuff. But yeah, everybody's like the Man Who Walked on Air is more of a fantasy story. So and the Damp Man, I don't know what that's weird. And then we got the Skull and the Stars, which is your I guess that's more that's sword and sorcery stuff. So yeah, I mean great art, fun stories, pulpy, and I think people will enjoy the graphic novel.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up there on the pulps because that's also a medium, a genre that I love. So curious about how pulps have kind of inspired your creating over the years as well.
Well, that goes back to Star Wars because, I was a little baby. I saw Star Wars and Star Wars was it. And then I learned, the making of Star Wars. And it was like George Lucas was inspired by, the pulps and particularly Flash Gordon. So then I went, oh, I got to see everything with Flash Gordon. And then when I was a kid, PBS was playing all the old movie serials. They was, so I started watching the Busted Crab Flash Gordon series. I thought that was great. So that kind of got me into the pulp stuff too, the pulp more on the literary side. So yeah, at that time it was Star Wars and then Indiana Jones and then we got even more pulpier. So, when I dove into how those things were created and found out really the inspiration for Star Wars and Indiana Jones, that really kind of got me into the Pulp Fiction and the old movie serials and stuff like that. And then I became a huge fan of the Flash Gordon, anything Flash Gordon. And then there was the Flash Gordon movie in 1980, 81. And I would say that movie probably inspired me more than Star Wars. Or I became really obsessed with Flash Gordon, the Sam Jones movie. I love that movie. Every time it was on TV and it was on all the time in the 80s, I would watch it. And I'm not usually the type of person who watches a movie more than once, but I would watch Flash Gordon over and over and over. So that was probably, my I would say probably Flash Gordon the movie is probably what got me into all of this, really like wanting to write, Star Wars. I was really young, so I saw that in the movie, but I was about four. So when I was still Flash Gordon, I was about eight, and that just blew me away. And then yeah, like what it was like a year or two later, then Conan the Barbarian came out. And I remember seeing
Mhm.
that, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So yeah, I mean that was another, it was a pulp was really kind of pulp in this movie series, which are connected. Um, Conan started in Weird Tales, of course. So, you know, early 80s pulp and the old movie series were really big because of, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, So you had all that. It was a great time, from like the late 70s to the mid 80s. That's You had the first superhero movies, you had the first space opera movies. You had the first, the 80s was all about the sword and sorcery stuff. You had like the Beastmaster and you had Conan and you had all those movies. So it was just an amazing time for genre, you know. So I was just right there in the middle of all that and just, sucking it all up and saying, oh, I would love to do this one day. And then here we are, 50 years later. But yeah, it all started with that. It all starts with Star Wars
Yeah. And Flash Gordon,
and
which
Flash Gordon. Well, it really started with Flash Gordon, yeah. So yeah,
right.
because George Lucas wanted to do Flash Gordon, and they wouldn't let him. And then he said, "I'll do Star Wars."
Yeah. It didn't hurt that the movie had a, theme song from Queen that was very hummable.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you take away the soundtrack. I don't know if that movie is, as cool.
Works as
I mean,
well.
the music, the whole soundtrack, and then yeah, I can talk about it all day because that after that was Highlander. It was another one like the Highlander. It was also Queen music, and they should just had Queen making music for every movie. It was just like just take it to another level because they're really probably mediocre. I mean, Flash Gordon isn't necessarily a great movie, but yeah, but with that soundtrack, it's insane. And Highlander too. Highlander they didn't do the score; they just did like two songs in it, but it's still the two songs they have in Highlander are pretty awesome too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's enough, you know.
yeah,
Just a little sprinkling of Queen will help
yeah. Maybe
any
we can get like
movie.
we also can get a Queen soundtrack for like Weird Tales or
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. If
We'll have to get
Freddie were
Adam
still here
Lambert.
with us.
But yeah, that's yeah. I mean, like being an 8-year old kid and seeing that in the movie theater is just like blown away. So
I wanted to ask about, well, you've talked a little bit already about how you've gotten contributors to this anthology and other anthologies, but does it usually start with folks you've worked with before? Um, and I guess, is it different between recruiting writers versus recruiting artists on a graphic anthology?
yeah, I think I've worked with everybody before in some capacity. Blake Norcott, I edited one of her stories for Weird Tales, and I was like, oh, I knew she did comics, so I was like, oh, sooner or later, I'm gonna ask her to do a story. Yeah, and then there's like kind of like the usual suspects at this point now, because like David Avalone has been in almost every project that I've done. So I mean, one thing I've learned is that it is easier to work with people who you've worked with and who uh will come through. Because then I always like when we work with someone new, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And um I've had writers who was supposed to be part of an anthology and then never turned the story in, or who turned the story in many months later and screw everything up. So you after doing this a while, you do kind of learn, all right, this person's reliable. Let's work with that person. Um, and with someone like David Avalone, who's very reliable and who's an amazing writer, you say, all right, let's work with him, and he can write in different genres, and he can be funny and he can be serious. So I like working with him. I love working with Steve Niles and Ray Bradbury, Jonathan Mayberry. Like I said, those guys just sit down and they write. So you don't have a problem getting the story from them. Because even if like Jonathan doesn't have the story and he hasn't even started, you can say, "Can you just write it today?" And he'll churn out a great story in just a day or two. Um, so yeah, after a while, I think all editors are like that because you'll see them working with a lot of the same writers over and over. But I always like to add new people to the mix, give them a tryout and see if they work out. Artists sometimes are a little harder to find, especially because their schedules get filled really quickly, and then sometimes they're more in demand than a lot of writers. Even when the writers are very successful, they can write a story, quickly. You can't really do the art fast. So sometimes, they're not available. So you have to go and try to find somebody else. And that too, unlike the writers who can maybe like give you a story in 2 or 3 days, if an artist is late, it could, there's nothing you can really do, and you can't like say really, speed that up. So sometimes you could be caught, waiting months and months and months. So that the same thing comes into the mix, like, who's reliable and who can get it done. Because making comics is a really long process. There's so much to it, from writing the script to approving the script and then getting the pencils and inks and then getting the coloring and then getting the lettering. So any one person in that chain drops the ball or is isn't and then things come up too, but they have personal issues and things like that, or the other issue is that I'm still a small fry as a publisher, but I'm working with a lot of people who are working for Marvel and DC and Dark Horse. And so what has happened on many occasions is that they say they're going to do a story, and then they get a job from Marvel and says, "Hey, we need you to do Spider-Man," and they go, "I'm dropping Monstrous," and then my story doesn't get done and gets put on the back burner. So that's happened a few times where the artist got a better gig and either put it on the back burner or we had to drop them and move on. So that happens a lot too.
Yeah, kind of following up with a process question. In this world of crowdfunding, how has that changed the way you approach the process, developing, launching, connecting with an audience? What has that allowed you to do?
Well, crowdfunding really has been allowing me to do all of this because doing comics not only takes a long time, but it also costs a lot of money. Uh, Something like the Kolchak 50th anniversary book, that was like that was like a six-figure book, to make. And we made a
Uh,
little over $100,000. There wasn't much profit, but that money was put into making that book. As I said, we are working with writers and artists from Marvel and DC. So these are like top of the line artists, and they're not cheap. So it costs a lot of money. Every page cost a few $100s. So with the 50th anniversary book, it was supposed to be a 100-page book. It became almost 200 pages, way over budget. So it was just tens of thousands of dollars just for the artwork, not even including the script. So it would be very hard for someone like me, who's not independently wealthy, to do this because I'd have to put all the money up front. So I would have to like, take out another mortgage on my house just to make a graphic novel, which could cost, I would say even minimum for like a high quality graphic novel, like maybe around 100 pages, would still cost you about $50,000 to do well. It would be really hard to
oh,
do it for much less than that because you have to figure it's gonna have to be at least $200 or $300 a page. So 100 and a good sized graphic novel, 100 pages, that's like 20, $30,000 just for the art, and then not including the covers and not including the writers. And just usually by then you like the writers like, can you just take like $20 a page, for a fee? Because it has to go into the artist because it's very much, how much you spend is how much quality you get. If you're gonna go and spend like $300 a page for art, then you'll get those guys from Marvel and DC. And then you can go down to like $100 a page, and there are people who do it for even less than $100 a page. The quality isn't there. Um, and I don't want to do that. I want it to be like the best looking book possible. But without crowdfunding and getting that money first, and then uh, being able to put the book together um, gives you the ability to do these big books where it would be very hard to do it the other way around. And then you're taking a huge risk, if you had to do this and just put all that money up front and then hope that it sells. And then you don't have the platform of, say, Kickstarter to sell it either. So now I'd have to put, let's say, $50,000 into a graphic novel, and then where do I sell it? Now I have to try to sell it on Amazon, and Amazon's taking a huge cut. Um, if you don't have distribution to bookstores too, then you're just going to sell it maybe on Amazon, which isn't great for comics or graphic novels, and you don't sell too much at like a convention. So I couldn't see how you can make back something like $50,000 um, the traditional way. So Kickstarter is not only that it raises the money, but you're able to sell so much through Kickstarter, and you're getting like 90% of the money because Kickstarter only takes a small percentage, where say, Amazon, Amazon's taking like 30%, but print they can take up to like 50%, or if you're going through like Ingram Spark, or if you're going through bookstores, it's more like 50%. And then you have to also factor in print costs. So a print book, you might just make like $2 for a $30 book. Whereas Kickstarter, you're making, $30 book, you're making like 27 bucks. So it would be very difficult to do it the traditional way.
Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of steps in the process, it sounds like. And just speaking on the scale and the accolades of what you've done, I'm also curious about what it's been like for you to be represented in the Bram Stoker Award category. What was that like for you?
That was terrifying. To have to go up and give a speech. It's one of those situations where I would love to win, but I also don't want to win, because I always was kind of like very introverted writer who was just doing this all by myself, and then never got any recognition for anything. So then that year was crazy. It was, there was like a 4 or 5 month stretch where it was like every week I was getting nominated for an award. Um, we were nominated. Well, this was 2023 or so. So yeah, we got nominated for the Stoker Award. We won that. We got with two nominations for the Rondo Hatton Award. We ended up winning both of them. The International Media Tie-in Writers, we won that. There was an Imagine Award from the Imaginarium convention, and we won that. So I won like 5 or 6 awards in a stretch of like 5 months. Um, I think I only had to give one speech though. I think for the Rondo Hatton Award, I had to send in a video, and that took me, I would say, about 200 takes. I had it on my phone, and there's all these takes. There's like it took up like they just keep scrolling. So that was scary on that. But I guess fortunately I haven't been nominated. I haven't won an award since then. I was nominated for a Shirley Jackson award, but I didn't win that. So I don't know. I mean, maybe I got lucky that year. That was that was a good year. I think people were just kind of blown away with the Kolchak stuff. So people just love Kolchak. And I think they never saw Kolchak done at that level, because we brought in all these heavy hitters, Steve Niles and Rodney Barnes doing Kolchak, and so I think we impressed a lot of people then. We'll see if I ever win another award, but I don't mind. I have my Stoker awards over there. Uh, so yeah, I only need to win once, and I'm happy. You know.
Nice, nice.
Well, congratulations. Well deserved. We're
Thank
a
you.
little late on the congratulations, but I'm sure there are more in your future.
One more, just yeah, just to show that it wasn't a fluke. So if I can just get one more under the
There you
belt.
go. Very much looking forward to Weird Tales. When it launches, you have at least one. I'm sure Jason is a steady number two for backers on that project. But just curious about anything else that's coming out of your mind, Monstrous Books, for the year 2026, since we're just at the beginning.
2026 is going to be a big year. Uh, so actually, I don't know when this is going to air, but on January 27th, which might be in the future, might be in the past, we got the Cultic Errors anthologies coming out, and that's going to be in bookstores and online, which is a prose anthology of Kolchak stories all throughout his career, from his high school days all the way up into his retirement in the 90s. That's a very cool book. Uh, then we're doing the Weird Tales Kickstarter, and then we have Creep Show. We got the license for Creep Show, so we're doing the
Hmm.
prose anthology on Creep Show because it's still a comic book, Creep Show comic book that Image puts out. But we're doing the first prose anthology of Creep Show. So we're doing new stories, um, in the same vein as Creep Show. Um, and we got Steve Niles is doing a story, and David Avalone is doing a story. But we got Nick Roberts doing a story, and Gwendolyn Keist is doing her. She's amazing writer too. Uh, and Jonathan Mayberry, I gotta think. Tim Wagner is doing a story, or he did a story. The all stories are actually in, except the one I wrote. I'm trying to write. So I'm gonna be the one who's gonna drag that out. So it's 13 stories, Creep Show, and each story will be introduced by the creep. We'll have a full page illustration before each story. So I'm very excited about that. Um, we do have two other Kolchak projects that are gonna come out this year. Um, One very big that has been a secret for a while, uh, which is going to be very interesting, and it's not necessarily a book. Uh, so that's going to be really cool. Um, yeah, and then it's just about trying to get all the stuff, that we kickstarted the last year out this year. So we have the Darkest Depths, and we have Monstrous the Kaju issue, and then that all should come out that sometime this year, and we have distribution now, so we should have books in Barnes and Noble and Books a Million, and also your local comic shop. So it should be an interesting year.
Looking forward to it all. Where can fans follow you and all the goings on with Monstrous?
Well, you can go to monstrousverse.com or Monstrous Books. That'll also take you there, and everything's there. The links to our Kickstarters and all our books are there. Or you can follow me, James Aquilone. Uh, I think I'm still ranked the highest. There's a couple other James Aquilones who showed up recently. Some young, and there are two of them, and they're actually somehow also connected to writing and comic books. So
Weird.
it's very strange because I all these years I've always been like the only James Aquilone out there. So but I'm the older one. So and hopefully I show up higher in the Google rankings. So yeah, but Monstrous Verse. One word. We're pretty much all our social media is monstrous verse. A couple of ones we couldn't get the handle, so it's monstrous underscore.
We hope you enjoyed that interview. We had a wonderful conversation with James. Great to explore Weird Tales, and there's so much in comics fandom that keeps coming back. So glad that this series is making its way out there. We hope you're going to check out the Kickstarter. I know that I will be. And fantastic conversation about horror, weird things, comics, and the publishing history of this creator, including the Bram Stoker. So very excited to get to talk with James about that as well. Mike, anything to add? Where can people find out about this lovely production?
Well, absolutely. Well, Jason, first of all, thank you for being on our first co-hosted episode together. I enjoyed the conversation quite a bit. James, thank you for being on the program to tell us all about Weird Tales and everything coming up at Monstrous Books. Again, go out and check out the Kickstarter. You'll find the link in the show notes. Everybody out there, thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing, going to our Patreon, going to Believe Network, doing all the great things that help get the Dollar Bin Bandits into more people's ear holes. I always use it once in a while. I just bring it back and just like to use that very, contradictory, sort of conflicting tone of that word. Anyway, thank you all out there, and we'll see you for one more episode this week. Take care.